Today's episode contains material that might be difficult or upsetting to hear about, and that may potentially trigger emotional or psychological reactions in individuals who have sensitivities. Listener discretion advised. Welcome, everyone. I'm Dana Peever, decision expert, author, speaker, and podcast host. You're listening to the Wildly Courageous Women podcast. More women than ever are faced with challenging decisions on a regular basis. I am so privileged to sit down with them to discuss exactly what they've gone through and how they've come out the other side, realizing their wildest dreams. I'm sure you'll be able to relate. And don't forget to stay to the end to take advantage of my latest free gift. Let's get started. Hello, you wildly courageous women, you. Welcome to the Wildly Courageous Women podcast. I'm Dana Peever, decision expert. And as always, we're here talking about decisions that have been made in our lives that were courageous or impactful or changed the course of our life, or even one that we wish we could go back on. Each week, I join you twice, once with a guest and once solo. Today, I'll be sharing an impactful decision that I'm actually currently in the process of making in my life. Since I've been studying the science of decision-making for over 30 years, the majority of my life's decisions have been made very intentionally, using my 5-step Decision Smith system and app. I'll walk you through all my thoughts behind the scenes, but before we get started, I want to remind listeners to stay to the end to get access to my latest freebie. All right, we're going to take this step by step. I want to set the stage for you as it relates to the decision that I'm going to share with you today. So let's dive right in. Many of you, especially those who have perhaps read my books, are familiar with my upbringing. To recap, my parents were married quite young, and they ultimately divorced when I was 5 years old. We moved immediately to live with my stepfather. So I had a younger brother who moved with us at the time, who actually was my stepfather's son, or is my stepfather's son. And ultimately, they had another child as well. So I grew up in a home with my mother, my stepfather, my half-brother, and my half-sister. And from the outside looking in, we were a really nice, happy family. What wasn't apparent was the physical and emotional abuse that was prevalent in the household. And, as a young child, you don't really have any choice but to endure. When I think back now, I'm sad for the child that had to go through that, but I've come out the other side, happy, well-adjusted. I have a really good life. So while it may have impacted me when I was younger, I've worked really hard to work through all of the issues that presented themselves as it related to my upbringing. There were a few circumstances that happened mostly when I was a teenager, and I think when my parents felt they were losing control of me, that's when the physical abuse became more apparent. I'll never forget standing in the hallway one morning, and I had done something wrong, and my stepfather slapped me across the face. And my mom was standing behind me, and she looked at him and said, "Get the other side to match." So he slapped me on the other side. And as you might imagine, the physical effect of that left a pooling of blood in my chin. I had a probably a 1.5, 2-inch circle that was like a bruise, in the dead center of my chin. And I remember being a cashier at the time at a department store, and people coming through my cash saying, "Dear, you've got some ink on your chin." And then I said, "Oh no, that's just a bruise." I think these days, if a teenager went to work with apparent bruises on her face, there would be a lot of different issues at hand. But at the time, nobody said anything. And I remember it being not long after that, I think I had received some more physical abuse at one point. And I said to myself, if it happens again, you need to move out. I think prior to that, I was still in high school, and I knew that I needed to finish high school to be able to make a life for myself. So I endured till high school was done. But I said to myself, if anything ever happens after I'm done high school, physically, that I would move out. So ultimately it did. And I got kicked out, was told not to come home ever again. We had been actually seeing a family counselor at that point in time. And I went to him because it happened on the weekend, and I went to him on the Monday. And he asked me to go see my family doctor because of all the physical bruises and cuts that I had on me. And he said he wanted the doctor to have a record of what I looked like that day. And I said, "No, I don't want to go to the doctor. I just want to move on with my life. I've moved out, and I just need to get on with my life." And he said, "No, I'd really like you to go to the doctor." And I said, "Well, if they go to the doctor, they'll, Children's Aid will somehow get involved because I've got younger siblings at home." He said, No, you're over 18, so they won't have to do that." So I went to my doctor and was then told that because there were siblings that were younger, underage, minors in the home, that he had to report it to Children's Aid. And I said to him, that's the last thing I need you to do. Like, my relationship with my parents will be irreparable if you do that. And he said, "I have no choice. I have a legal obligation." So I know that they were mortified. And when Children's Aid came to the house, they put on their best show and proved what upstanding citizens they were, and that they would never, ever consider having any physical abuse in their home, which was a blatant lie. But because of that, I was told to stay off the property. I was kicked off for 2 years, not allowed to talk to anybody in the family. It was probably good for me because, it gave me the time to figure out how to best move forward with my life without any interference or any recommendations made by my family. So life went on. Things progressed. I finished university. I had started dating someone during university, and we moved in together after I was done. That was a requirement. I said I wouldn't even talk about next steps until I had completed my degree. So completed my degree, we moved in together. Then after a year, we bought a house together. And I remember not having had much interaction with my parents during that time. But we had started to open up the doors of communication again. And I remember talking to my mom one day. I was probably in my late 20s. And I don't know how it came up, but I remember so clearly, talking about growing up and what I had endured. And she said to me at that point in time, everything you got, you deserved. So I know I hung up pretty quickly on that conversation, and it was another couple years before I wanted to reach out again. And that became a cycle. That went on for another almost 15 or 20 years, where something would happen and we'd part ways and not talk for a few years. And what I would do, and I think it's very, very normal, is that my life would settle and I would be happy with how things were. And, married life was great, kids were great, house was great, work was great. So if I'm doing so well, they must be too. And maybe they've come around and maybe things with them will be better because my life's gotten better. So theirs must have too in the meantime. So I'd reach back out tentatively and, start initiating contact and more visiting and things like that. And things would be good for a while, but inevitably something would happen and it would trigger a conversation that didn't end up going well. And I would retreat and put up those boundaries again. And that happened over and over and over again. When I look back, I was in my mid-teens when things started to really go south. And I think it was about 45 before I finally put my foot down and realized that I couldn't stay on this roller coaster, this merry-go-round, this cycle of, gradually building up some trust, having it thrown in my face, putting up walls and boundaries, no contact for some time, then feeling like, oh, I shouldn't be so hard on them. I should give them a chance, opening up those doors again. The cycle was so apparent. But I just kept thinking, it's got to get better. It's got to get better at some point. And I remember, when I put up my boundaries for the last time, which was about 8 years ago, I remember talking to my sister at one point and her saying, quit being the victim. That all happened to you when you were growing up. It was your childhood. It's in the past. Get on with it. Get on with your life. Stop being such a martyr. And I said to her, I said, your upbringing, she's 10 years younger than me. Your upbringing was very different than mine. And the emotional abuse that I endured growing up had not stopped. It was prevalent to that very day. I remember there was a time when my mom insisted that I'd been on a family trip with them. And meanwhile, that trip had taken place after I got kicked out of the house. And she went so far as to say, no, I remember we ran into your school teacher and I said, I just, at that point in time, I just shrugged my shoulders. I said, okay, because there was no arguing with her. And I remember it was a year or two later. And my stepfather came to me in private and said, hey, we were looking through those pictures from that trip not too long ago. You weren't in them. And I said, I know. He's like, why didn't you say anything? I said, it's not worth it. Like, it's just not worth it. And then, another circumstance happened where I got in trouble for something that I did, something that I stood up for. And it was only 10 minutes later that my stepfather came back around and was recounting what had just transpired 10 minutes prior. But his story was already completely different than what had actually transpired. So it was so apparent in that moment of how often they would be in a circumstance and then try and talk themselves out of the fact that they'd done anything wrong and confabulated a new story in their head in that quick of a time to make sure that they weren't seen as the bad guy. And it was like when I realized that, like when I saw it happen in real time within 10 minutes, when, we were in close proximity to each other, it was such an eye opener for me because I realized, wow, like this is their pattern. This is what they do. And I realized in that moment that I was not going to be able to change that. So I walked away and I severed ties, and I haven't talked to them in about 8 years. Sure, they've tried to text. They've tried to get in touch. I'll thank them if that's required, but I don't initiate any conversations, and I don't answer texts that would put myself in a position where there would be ongoing communication back and forth. I had a therapist through all of the issues that I was going through 8 years ago, and she's still around to this day. And I talk to her when I need to. It's not a regular basis or anything anymore, although it was very regular at that point in time. And sometimes I'll talk to her and I'll say, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe I should just give them another chance. And she said to me, do not open those doors. It took you 30 years to shut them the first time. Can you imagine how long it would take you to shut them again? And nothing has changed for them. Nothing has changed. And the reason I know nothing has changed is because of this. After I stopped talking to them and engaging with them, they would continue to send birthday presents to our home in the form of money. We always got, a good sum of money for our birthdays. They would send it to the kids, and they would send a birthday present to my husband, and I would get nothing in the mail. And that was pretty hurtful. And during that time, because they couldn't get a hold of me or couldn't get answers from me, they started going through my husband. And they started texting him. And I said, can you please not engage? Like, this is just not helpful. It's not beneficial. It's not good. Please just ignore them or let them know that, you're not going to be the go-between. Unfortunately, he didn't do that. We've since divorced, which some of you may know. And my parents continue to try to reach out. They text my kids quite often, and my mom has a tendency to get upset if, she doesn't get a response back from a text, within half an hour. And, half the time the kids are in class or, busy or working or something like that. And so when they don't get responses from my kids directly, they'll reach out to my ex-husband and say, your kids aren't texting me back. And I've let my kids make their own decisions about their grandparents. I've shared the good things about them, but I've left them to their own devices to determine whether or not they want to stay in contact. They have a lot of stories from visits when they were growing up that they would prefer not to remember. As a mom at the time, I was trying to do the right thing by, allowing the grandparents an opportunity to spend time with their grandchildren. If I had to do that over again, I may not be so quick to let them spend as much time together, because I know now how my kids came away from those visits feeling, and I don't wish that on anyone. So my ex-husband moved out a year and a half ago. My parents didn't find out we were divorced until almost a year after it had happened. And during that time, my ex-husband had already moved out, and my parents had sent gifts for the kids to my place, which used to be our place. It used to be the family home. I stayed here. So those things arrived when it was just me and the kids got them. But once my parents found out that we were divorced, for the next set of birthdays and for Christmas, they texted my ex-husband, asked him for his new address, and then sent the kids' birthday presents and Christmas presents to him. So, unbeknownst to them, they had already sent them to me once when it was just me, and the kids got them no problem. So just because they found out new information, things would change. So another thing that's transpired is that my sister is somebody else I won't engage with. So she has a tendency to text my best friend to make sure I'm getting messages. And not too long ago, she got a message that talked about an upcoming family reunion this summer, and that my ex-husband had been invited. Sometimes I don't even know what to say. My son's birthday was not too long ago, and again, a birthday card went to my ex-husband's house. Let me point out that last Christmas, after they sent the gifts to my ex-husband, he gave them to the kids, who brought the box here when they joined me for Christmas and opened them in front of me. So awkward. Like, my ex-husband's dad was there giving things from his ex-in-laws. The kids are like, what's this? And why are we, it's just awkward and ugly. And at the end of the day, I don't know what they're trying to prove. The only thing I can think of is that if they sent things to my house, that they don't think that I'll give the kids their gifts. Somehow I'll hold them back. What kind of mother am I to do something like that? I know that that's how they acted as parents. And so they're probably just projecting on me, but that's not at all. I'm not at all the same as them. I want my kids to, get gifts and be celebrated. Why would I take that away from them? That's the only thing I can think of that they're worried about, that I wouldn't give them the gifts. But what they don't realize is that my kids are damn smart, and they don't put up with bullshit. And so the message that my parents are sending my kids is this: we don't trust your mother, so we're going to send your gifts to your father. And kids don't like people talking poorly about their parents. It doesn't matter who it is. So the fact that my kids know that this is how my parents feel, instead of wanting to engage with my parents, it makes them want to stay away even longer. So like whatever they're trying to do is friggin' backfiring. So I know my therapist has said don't engage, but by the time this podcast airs, I will have sent a letter to my parents with a request that the gifts come here and to stop the shenanigans. And I'm going to point out the ramifications of their actions. And I'm going to ask them point blank what their purpose is in sending them to my ex-husband. I am going to put in the letter that I'm not expecting a response to the letter, that I simply expect their behavior to change in terms of where the gifts go. And I'm going to leave it at that. So perhaps at some point in the future, I'll be able to give you an update on what transpired after they received that letter. All right. To all of the listeners out there, thanks for joining me today. If you're ready to realize your wildest dreams, come and join us in the Wildly Courageous Women Facebook group, where we're changing people's lives one brave decision at a time. I'm Dana Peever. Until next time, make great decisions and do life fun. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Wildly Courageous Women. Keep listening to hear more stories of these incredible women realizing their wildest dreams. If you have a story to tell about a decision that you've made that has impacted your life, I'd love to feature you as a guest. Please get in touch and don't forget to grab my latest gift by clicking below. I'm Dana Peever. As always, make great decisions and do life fun.